Hi everyone, this is the final video revising the First World War, and this video is going to look at part 3 of your specification, ending the war. It's worth perhaps taking a moment to think about this question on the top of the screen. Why did Britain and her allies win? What do you remember? I'll be quiet a moment to see if you can think of any of these key reasons why Britain and her allies win. By all means, even take the opportunity to pause this video if you want to have a go at noting some ideas down. Okay, this video is going to cover the following aspect of your specification, and maybe you've got some of these ideas from that prompt that I just gave you a moment ago. So we are going to cover today the changes in the Allied forces that take place in 1917, the military developments in 1918 and their contribution to Germany's defeat, and we're going to look at some of those key events leading up to the end of the war, and we're going to finally look at the German surrender in 1918. So there are significant changes to the Allied forces in 1917 that are going to massively affect this conflict. The first of these is that I'm going to discuss is the Russians. The Russians stopped fighting in November 1917. This is because there is a revolution in Russia in 1917. A communist government, the Bolsheviks, come to power under Lenin. And they've promised the people bread, peace and land. The war has affected the people of Russia very badly. Many people are incredibly poor in this country anyway, even at the start of the conflict. And the war has dragged on and gone very badly for them. And hence this slogan, bread, peace and land, have been very appealing to people. And that's why a number of them had supported the revolution that happened in November 1917. So as soon as the revolution takes place, they stop fighting in November 1917 and they formally agree peace terms with the Germans in March 1918 with the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk that they sign. This is a very harsh treaty on the Russians, and the Russians lose big amounts of territory, for instance, in this. But Russia has now pulled out of the war. However, the Allies have also had a positive. America had declared war on Germany on the 6th of April 1917. There were a number of reasons for this. Probably the most important of these, though, is the fact that Germany had continued to attack American shipping. They'd been doing this really from the early days of this conflict. But in 1915, they had sunk the American ship, the Lusitania, that had over 120 Americans on board. And the Americans had been outraged. As a result, the Germans for a few years had pulled back on their policy of submarine warfare and had stopped attacking ships from neutral countries like America. But as the war had become more difficult and the situation had become more challenging for the Germans, and as they became more and more determined that they had to do something to relieve the deadlock on the Western Front, the Germans had gone back to this policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. This had angered the Americans and been a big part of Wilson's decision to bring them into the war in 1917. There were also some other factors. For instance, a telegram was discovered where Germany had asked the Mexicans to join the war and attack America. So a number of things combined together, but especially the impact of the war at sea. However, it was not going to be until the summer of 1918 that America will be able to make a decisive contribution in Europe. They do make a contribution from the outset. They're protecting our shipping as it crosses the Atlantic. We increasingly get even more financial and military support from them in terms of supplies. But by the summer of 1918, 1 million American troops would land in France. This, therefore, gave the Germans kind of their last window of opportunities, they saw it. The Germans would now try to seek to take advantage of the situation that had been created. Russia had left the conflict. America had declared war, but were not going to be able to send troops across in decisive numbers until summer of 1918. So this is going to lead Germany to attempt a big push to win the war before they realised they were going to be hopelessly overwhelmed by these newly arrived American troops. There are going to be a number of developments leading up to 1918, though, that contribute to Germany's defeat. Eventually, America will be sending tanks and heavy guns to France, and they begin to move troops there at a rate of 50,000 a month in 1918. Although tanks have been first used during the Battle of the Somme, we know that initially they were unreliable and often broke down. However, by August 1918, they're used far more effectively to provide the Allies with an important advantage. So tanks are used far more effectively in 1918 and important in these final kind of phases of the fighting. They also use aeroplanes as well to support the offensives. So by 1918, we see that the British Army and her allies, they're far more able to use this combination of technology together to get a decisive edge. And by October 1918 as well, of course, there had been a huge increase in the size of the Royal Flying Corps, as they're known at the time, which had over 20,000 aircraft by this point. So there's going to be a number of things that come together to lead to Germany's defeat in 1918. So back to the point that I was making before. Germany has a window of opportunity. Russia has pulled out of the war. The Americans have declared war, but don't yet have troops there. The Germans therefore decide to have a decisive push. They really realise that this is their last roll of the dice in terms of trying to win this war. They realise that once they get to the summer, once the American troops are arriving in significant numbers, they realise that they're really going to be overwhelmed. So this is a big push in the spring of 1918 to try to win the war before this happens. They're of course going to be extra supported in doing this by the fact that fighting has finished on the Eastern Front. The Russians have surrendered, so they are able to use all of the troops that they once had on the East to support this decisive, as they hope it's going to be, push on the Western Front. So the German commander knew that if Germany was to win the war, he had to deliver a knockout blow to the Allies before American troops arrived. And on the 21st of March 1918, he therefore launched the Ludendorff offensive, or it's sometimes called the Spring Offensive. Initially, this offensive was successful. That combination of technology that we've referred to there, the Allies using by later on in the year, the Germans are also able to combine technology very effectively and gain significant amounts of ground. The initial offensive is successful and the Germans advance to the River Marne. However, the Allies just managed to hold their line, so the Germans don't totally break through. And the Germans had lost significant numbers in even attempting this offensive. They'd lost about 400,000 men. And by this stage of the war, there were no obvious replacements for them. So this was their final push to win the war, but it's also going to exhaust their final supplies of men and resources. Between May and August of 1918, the Germans made no further progress, and it was clear now really that they had run out of time and resources. This will lead us into the phase of the war known as the 100 Days. And on the 8th of August 1918, the start of the 100 Days, the Allies counterattacked along much of the Western Front. This later became known as the German Army's Black Day. Improved tactics could be seen. So we see this at the Battle of Amiens, where Colonel John Fuller persuaded Rawlinson to use 412 tanks followed by soldiers, supported by over 1,000 combat aircraft, which led to the Allies breaking through the German front line. So there's a good example there of how they begin to use the different weapons together. It was now seemingly just a matter of time before the Allies defeated Germany. By late September, they had reached this very well supported German Hindenburg line. By October, the Germans were in full retreat. And this period from the 8th of August to the final armistice on the 11th of November has become known as the 100 Days. The Austrians surrendered on the 3rd of November 1918, and in Germany, crowds demanded the Kaiser's abdication, seeing him as a final obstacle in their way of achieving peace. Official statistics also attribute nearly 763,000 wartime deaths in Germany to starvation caused by the Allied blockade. So the war at sea and the blockade had also played a role here. I suppose, first of all, initially in bringing America the war, but also here in the way that it exhausts the war effort within Germany and causes so many deaths within Germany as well. On the 9th of November, the German Kaiser abdicates and the armistice was finally signed at 5 a.m. on the 11th of November to come into effect at 11 a.m. Paris time, which is 12 noon German time. The final part of the specification says you should be aware of the contribution of these two men. Ferdinand Foch is a French commander, but in spring 1918 he's appointed to an even wider role. He was appointed as Commander-in-Chief of all the Allied armies, bringing a much-needed coordinated approach. The Allies were basically fearful that in the light of such a huge German offensive as we have in the Ludendorff or Spring Offensive of that year, there was a danger that the Allied armies would stop kind of working together, that people would kind of fall into defending their own areas and all coordination would be lost. In giving this role of coordinating the armies, this means that he has the oversight and he has the ability to give orders to any of those kind of generals from different countries serving below him to try and bring some coordination initially to that defence of the Spring or Ludendorff offensive, and then later on the 100 Days. In the summer of 1918, he was given the title of Marshal Foch, and he planned with Haig, the British general, the grand offensive against Germany from August 1918 onwards, this period that became known as the 100 Days. General Sir Douglas Haig, of course, is a controversial figure. We've spoken about battles at the Somme and Passchendaele, where he was criticised for some of his conduct. But he did command the British armies from 1915 until the end of the war. Initially, he was resistant to new technologies and tactics. He's suspicious initially of technology like the machine guns, thinking that they're overrated, but eventually became active in promoting innovations which helped the Allied victory. Haig has been commended for his commitment to the war-winning strategy of defeating the Germans on the Western Front. In other words, he realised that there was no alternative really to engaging and defeating the Germans on the Western Front. In spring 1918, he led determined resistance against the German offensive, and from August 1918, working under the overall control of Foch, he led the British army against the main German armies. His armies captured nearly 200,000 prisoners and nearly 3,000 guns, and in spite of huge British casualties, Haig was decorated after the war and was seen as a war hero. So that brings to the end our World War I revision. That was video 3 of 3, so remember there are 2 more before this if you've watched them in the wrong order. This is what we've covered as far as the specification goes. So we've covered today the changes in the Allied forces, the military developments and their contribution to Germany's defeat, and this final surrender of Germany. And as I've said at the end of each of these videos, I would recommend that you rewatch this video and pause it as many times as you need to. You can read your revision guide and complete the associated activities within there. Make sure you're using your printed notes on these topics, either the full or the simplified versions. You should have these already. You can contact your subject teacher, but they should also be available in the shared area as well. You can use those materials to make your own revision notes on each of these topics. So for instance, I see lots of students using those little index cards in order to have little notes on each topic, but make sure you then use those to do something with them, test yourself or get a friend to test you or a family member or whoever. And yeah, I would recommend that you look at past paper questions as well. These are available on the AQA website. Ask your teacher if you can't find them. They could send you a link and practice them. Or if you don't fancy doing the full thing, then you can even bullet point or mind map your answers just so that you've had a bit of a look. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful and good luck in all of your exams. Thank you.